Theo swiped his badge at the door he'd walked through every single morning for the past decade. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. A security guard he barely recognized approached, apologetic, awkward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reyes. Mr. Daniel Reyes had your access removed this morning." Theo let out a short laugh, the kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't yet believe what your ears just heard. "That has to be a mistake," he said. "I co-founded this company." The guard just shrugged. "I only do what the system tells me, sir." Theo pulled out his phone and called his brother. One ring, then straight to voicemail. He stood there, staring through the glass doors at the building he had helped build with his own two hands, a building that, as of this morning, no longer recognized his name. 10 years of his life were on the other side of that glass. And for the first time, he wasn't sure any of it still belonged to him. 10 years earlier, Daniel and Theo Reyes were two brothers with a busted blue pickup truck, a handful of tools, and a dream their father had never managed to achieve. Their father, James Reyes, had spent most of his life working construction. He owned a small contracting business, but keeping it alive had never been easy. Some months, there was enough work. Other months, there were barely enough jobs to pay the bills. Theo and Daniel had grown up watching their father come home exhausted, his hands rough from years of physical labor, his work boots covered in dust. They had seen the unpaid bills on the kitchen table. They had heard their parents whispering about money late at night. And they had watched their father fight to keep a business alive that never seemed to give him the life he had hoped for. One evening, when the brothers were teenagers, Theo asked their father why he kept going. James looked at his sons and smiled. "Because if I quit every time something got hard," he told them, "you too would know what it means to finish what you started." The words stayed with them. Years later, when Daniel and Theo decided to build something of their own, they remembered their father's struggle. But they also remembered his mistakes. They promised themselves they would do things differently. This time, they would build something that could last. Together, Daniel had the personality for business. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a handshake, a new client, and twice the work they had expected. Theo was different. He was quieter. He was the builder. He could look at a blueprint and immediately see what needed to be done. Daniel could sell the dream. Theo could turn it into something real. They were brothers. Partners. 50-50. At least, that's what they believed. Their first jobs were small. A roof repair here. A commercial renovation there. They worked from their apartments, kept their tools in the back of their old pickup truck, and spent almost every dollar they earned putting back into the business. When they finally decided to register the company, Daniel volunteered to handle the paperwork. "I'll put it under my name for now," he told Theo. They were sitting at their kitchen table late one night, surrounded by invoices and construction estimates. "Just to make things easier with the bank. We'll fix the ownership paperwork later." Theo looked at his brother. "You're sure?" Daniel laughed. "Man, we're brothers. It's 50-50. You really think I'm going to steal from you?" Theo laughed too. And that was the end of the conversation. No lawyer. No formal partnership agreement. No contract. Just two brothers who believed their word meant more than a piece of paper. For the first few years, it seemed like they were right. The company grew. One crew became two. Then three. Their old pickup truck was replaced with company vehicles. Their tiny operation became a real business. They hired employees. They won larger contracts. And eventually, people around town began recognizing the name. Reyes Construction Group. Daniel handled the clients. Theo handled the work. They made decisions together. They celebrated together. And whenever someone asked who owned the company, they always gave the same answer. "Both of us." But there was one problem. Legally, that wasn't true. The company was registered under Daniel's name. And every time Theo mentioned fixing it, Daniel had an answer. "After this project. We're too busy right now." Why bring lawyers into something that's working? "Come on, Theo. We're brothers." So Theo let it go. Again. And again. Because every time he looked at Daniel, he saw the brother who had grown up beside him. The brother who had shared his dream. The brother who had stood beside him when they had nothing. Theo believed that history was stronger than paperwork. He was wrong. 10 years after they started, Reyes Construction Group was worth more money than either brother had ever imagined. They had employees, major contracts, a modern office downtown, and a reputation that had taken years to build. From the outside, the brothers had everything. But somewhere along the way, something between them had changed. Theo noticed it first in the small things. Daniel started attending meetings without him. He began taking phone calls behind closed doors. There were conversations about the company's future that Theo wasn't included in. When Theo asked questions, Daniel always had an explanation. Just investors. Just another opportunity. Nothing you need to worry about. Theo wanted to believe him.
So he did.
Until Marissa, Theo's wife, noticed it too. One night, she watched Theo staring at his phone after another unanswered call from Daniel. "Something's wrong," she said. Theo shook his head. "Daniel wouldn't do that to me." Marissa looked at him carefully. "That's not what I asked." Theo didn't answer, because somewhere inside, he had started asking himself the same question. Then came the dinner that changed everything. The whole family was gathered around Elena Reyes's dining table. Their mother sat at the center. Theo and Marissa were on one side. Daniel sat across from them with his pregnant wife, Lauren. It was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner, until Daniel started talking about the company. He was describing how well things were going, how much the business had grown, how much more it could become. Then he said something that made Theo stop eating. "This company is exactly where I want it to be." Theo looked up. Daniel continued talking, but Theo barely heard him. "Not where we want it to be. Not where we've brought it. Where I want it to be." It was only one word. But sometimes, one word is enough to reveal what someone has been thinking for years. Later that night, Theo asked Daniel about it. Daniel laughed. "You really took that seriously?" "Maybe."
"Come on, man.
"You're my brother." Theo stared at him. "That's not an answer." Daniel's smile disappeared. "You're overthinking this." And maybe Theo was. Until a few weeks later. He was at a construction site when a contractor they had worked with for years casually mentioned something Theo had never heard before. "So, I guess you're finally cashing out."
Theo for that when?
"What are you talking about?" The contractor looked confused. "The sale." Theo's stomach dropped. "What sale?" The man immediately realized he had said too much. He tried to backtrack, but it was too late. Theo drove straight to the office. Daniel was sitting behind his desk.
Calm.
Almost too calm. Theo closed the door behind him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel looked up. "Tell you what?" "The sale." For the first time, Daniel's expression changed.
Theo stipet lo.
"You're selling the company?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "It's complicated."
No.
Theo's voice was quiet. "It's not." Daniel stared at him. Then, he said the words Theo would remember for the rest of his life. "It's my name on the company." The room went silent. Theo felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. "Daniel, you know how the business is registered. That doesn't mean you own everything." "Legally?" Daniel shook his head. "That's exactly what it means." Theo stared at his brother. 10 years. 10 years of early mornings, late nights, missed birthdays, missed holidays. Every job, every risk, every dollar they had put back into the business. And Daniel was telling him that none of it mattered. Theo's voice trembled. "We built this together." Daniel looked away. "I know. Then why are you doing this?" Daniel finally looked back at him. "Because things change." Theo couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Not like this." Daniel's face hardened. "Feelings aren't a contract, Theo." That sentence broke something inside him. Because Daniel was right. And that was the worst part. Theo left the office and drove straight to a lawyer. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She listened as Theo explained everything. The company, the partnership, the paperwork, the years they had worked together. Then Theo showed her the evidence he had. Text messages, emails, financial records, and finally, the voicemail. Evelyn listened carefully. Daniel's voice came through the phone. 6 years younger. Confident.
Warm.
Half of this is yours, man. Always. You know that. When the voicemail ended, Evelyn looked at Theo. Did he say this often? Not always in a voicemail. Theo pulled out his phone. I have messages. Evelyn read through them. Then she leaned back. You may have a case. Theo felt a small wave of relief. Then she continued. But it won't be simple. The relief disappeared. What does that mean? It means years of litigation. Theo stared at her. How many? Possibly several. And the sale? That could complicate things. Theo looked down at the floor. Evelyn continued. If you want to fight this, we can. Theo didn't answer. You have evidence that supports your claim, she said. But your brother's name is on the company documents. That gives him a significant legal advantage. Theo closed his eyes. He had spent 10 years believing that being loyal to his brother was the same thing as protecting himself. Now he was discovering the difference. When Theo got home, Marissa was waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. Theo sat at the kitchen table. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Theo said, I could sue him. Marissa looked at him. Will you? I don't know. Theo thought about his mother. Elena wasn't young anymore. Her health had been getting worse. And Daniel's wife was pregnant with their first child. A lawsuit wouldn't just hurt Daniel. It would drag the entire family into the middle of a war. Theo didn't want to destroy his mother's final years. He didn't want his nephew or niece to grow up hearing stories about how their father betrayed their uncle. But he also couldn't simply walk away. Not after everything. That night, Theo went through old photographs. He found one of himself and Daniel as teenagers. They were standing beside their father's old blue pickup truck. Their father was in the background holding a toolbox. The brothers were smiling. They looked so young, so certain. They had believed they could build something better than what their father had built. And for 10 years, they had. Theo stared at the photograph. Then he remembered something his father used to say. Never let money become more important than the people who helped you earn it. Theo had never forgotten those words. But now he understood something else. His father had also taught him that finishing what you started mattered. Theo hadn't spent 10 years building that company just to disappear quietly. He didn't want revenge. He wanted the truth. So Theo made a decision. He wouldn't destroy his brother. But he wouldn't let Daniel erase him either. The day of the sale arrived. Daniel walked into the conference room expecting to sign the papers and walk away with millions of dollars. Richard Blake, the buyer, sat across the table with his lawyers. The contracts were ready. The deal was almost complete. Then the door opened. Theo walked in. Daniel immediately stood. Theo looked at him. Don't. Daniel's jaw tightened. This isn't the time. Theo walked to the table.
No.
He placed his phone down. This is exactly the time. Richard looked between the brothers. Who is this? Daniel didn't answer. Theo did. My brother. Then he looked directly at Daniel. And your partner.
Daniel's face changed.
Leave. Theo shook his head. You told him I had nothing to do with this company. Richard's expression hardened. Is that true? Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Theo picked up his phone. I want you to hear something. He pressed play. Daniel's younger voice filled the room. Half of this is yours, man. Always. You know that. Silence. The voicemail ended. Richard stared at Daniel. What is this? Daniel looked at Theo. That was years ago.
Theo, not that.
Exactly. Richard turned to his lawyers. Did we know about this? One of them shook his head.
No.
Richard looked back at Daniel. Is he a partner? Daniel said nothing. Daniel.
Still nothing.
Theo watched his brother. For years, Daniel had always known what to say. He could sell anything. He could convince anyone. But now there was nothing left to sell. Because the truth was sitting right in front of him. Richard stood. I'm suspending the transaction. Daniel's face went pale. What? Until we understand exactly what we're buying. Richard, this is a misunderstanding. Richard shook his head.
No. He looked at Theo.
Do you have evidence?
Theo not dead.
Yes. Richard looked back at Daniel. Then we have a problem. The lawyers began gathering the documents. Daniel watched millions of dollars disappear from the table. But Theo wasn't watching the money. He was watching his brother. The same brother who had once sat beside him in an old pickup truck and promised they would build something together. The same brother who had promised half the company was his. The same brother who had just tried to sell all of it without telling him. When everyone else left the room, the brothers were alone. Daniel sat down. Theo remained standing. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "I never meant for it to go this far." Theo looked at him. "You knew." Daniel looked down. "I knew. You knew I was your partner." "Yes." "You knew the company was ours." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Yes." Theo's voice became quieter. "Then why?" Daniel struggled to answer. "I don't know." Theo shook his head. "That's not good enough." Daniel looked up. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing everything." Theo stared at him. "You were afraid of losing everything."
He paused.
"While you were taking everything from me." Daniel's face crumpled. Theo looked away. For the first time, Daniel didn't try to defend himself. He didn't blame the paperwork. He didn't blame the lawyers. He didn't say things had changed. He simply said, "I'm sorry." Theo closed his eyes. He had imagined hearing those words for months. But now that they had finally come, they didn't fix anything. Theo looked at his brother. "I believe you're sorry." Daniel looked up. "But I can't go back to the way things were." Daniel nodded. "I know. The company is over for me." Daniel swallowed. "I know." Theo picked up his phone. Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. "You should have put my name on the paper." Daniel looked down. "I should have."
Theo not dead.
"That's all I ever wanted." Then he left. The sale didn't happen the way Daniel had planned. The buyer renegotiated the deal. Theo's evidence forced the ownership dispute into the open. Eventually, after lawyers and negotiations, Theo received a settlement that reflected the years he had spent building the company. It wasn't everything he could have fought for, but it was enough to start again. And Theo decided that was what he would do. Start again. Months later, he opened a small construction company of his own. 3 employees. 2 trucks. 1 modest office. It reminded him of the beginning. Except this time, there was one major difference. His name was on everything. The ownership documents. The bank accounts. The contracts. Every agreement. Everything. From day one. One afternoon, Theo stood outside his new office looking at the company sign. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't expected.
Peace.
His phone rang. It was Daniel. Theo almost didn't answer. Then he did. "Hello." Daniel was quiet. "Mom wants us to have dinner." Theo looked through the window of his office. "Both of us." "Yes."
Theo thought about it.
"Okay." They met at their mother's house that weekend. It was awkward at first, but slowly, the tension began to fade. They talked about their father. They talked about the old pickup truck. They talked about the days when they had nothing. They didn't talk about the company. Not that night. Maybe they weren't ready. Maybe they never would be. But they were in the same room. And for now, that was enough. Theo never went back into business with Daniel. And Daniel never asked him to. Their relationship didn't return to what it had been. Some things can't be undone. But over time, they began rebuilding something different. Not a business. Not a partnership. A relationship. One that was no longer built on blind trust. Theo had learned a lesson that had cost him 10 years to understand. Trust matters. Family matters. But neither should ever be used as an excuse to leave yourself unprotected. You can love your family and still put things in writing. You can trust someone and still read the contract. You can believe in a person's heart and still protect your future. Because sometimes the person you trust most can be the person who hurts you the deepest. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life trying to get back what you lost.
Or,
you can take what you've learned and build again. Theo chose to build again. Years later, he would still think about that old blue pickup truck. The truck where two brothers once sat and dreamed about changing their lives. They had wanted to build something that would last. In the end, they did. It just didn't last in the way they imagined. Theo couldn't change what Daniel had done. He couldn't get back the years of trust. But he could decide what happened next. And this time, he didn't need a handshake. He didn't need a promise. He didn't need to borrow anyone else's name. Because when the next contract landed on his desk, Theo picked up the pen and signed his own name.